Everyone was playing and having fun, and the children were dancing. He wondered, is this some kind of holiday? It seemed so, and that made him happy. The entire city was out in the streets, which would ease his loneliness, having no place to stay. A boy approached him, and Khaled asked, "Why is everyone celebrating like this?" The boy answered cheerfully, "The celebration hasn't started yet." Khaled laughed, playfully teasing the boy, "So when does it begin?" The boy looked puzzled. "Why is your accent so strange?" Khaled replied, "I'm from the north. I'm a stranger here." The boy corrected him, "You were a stranger, but now you're one of the people of Zikola." Khaled smiled and placed his hand on the boy's head. "I know that Zikola is a land of generosity." The boy continued, "Today, everyone is preparing for the celebration, but the real festival is tomorrow. It's the greatest celebration in the world. Many people travel from distant lands to gather on the nearby hill just to witness our festivities." Khaled was surprised and asked, "What's the reason for the celebration?" The boy's face showed shock. "I thought you were rich. Please don't make me doubt my ability to recognize people." Then he continued, "Our celebrations begin tomorrow. It's Zikola Day, the day that makes Zikola the most famous city in history, a day of joy for all its people." He paused for a moment before adding, "Except for one person, of course." Khaled frowned. "Who is that?" The boy chuckled. "It seems you don't know much about Zikola." He sighed and looked at him seriously. "Sir, on Zikola Day, the poorest person in the city is executed." Khaled was stunned as the boy explained that on this day, the city's poorest individual is sacrificed. He immediately panicked. He was the poorest person in the city. He had no money, and after everything he had been through, it was clear that his currency was worthless here. If what the boy said was true, he would be the chosen victim. His thoughts were interrupted when the boy continued, "Usually, there's a competition among the three poorest people in the city, but this time, unfortunately, there will be no contest. The other two managed to escape, so the remaining one will be executed immediately." Oh, if only you had seen them yourself! Khaled suddenly remembered the two people he had met in the desert. He muttered to himself, "The lunatics." The boy overheard him and gave him a confused look. Khaled quickly changed the subject. "So, the poorest person has already been chosen?" The boy nodded. "Yes." Khaled let out a deep breath of relief and secretly thanked God. The boy continued, "Normally, the three poorest people are imprisoned for a few days before the contest of wealth and poverty begins. The loser is then executed. But since the other two escaped, there's no need for the competition. The third one will be sacrificed." He pointed to a nearby house. "He's from our district." Khaled looked at the house in confusion. How did he end up being the poorest? The boy left to rejoin his friends while Khaled sat back down, lost in thought. What is happening to me? He replayed everything that had happened since he found himself in the desert. But one question grew stronger in his mind, one he had tried to ignore all this time. Where am I? What is this Zikola that I've never heard of? The people here were baffling. Some seemed rational, but many acted completely irrational. His body shivered as a new thought crossed his mind. What if I traveled back in time through the corridor, just like in those foreign novels I used to read? No, that's impossible. I've never heard of Zikola before, never read about it in history. He tried to dismiss the thought, but his mind fought back. Then why not? The horse-drawn carriages, the people's clothing. It's nothing like the 21st century. These things are from centuries ago. Then another possibility struck him. Maybe this is just an isolated place I've never heard of. Maybe it's their traditional attire. But his rational mind wasn't convinced. What are you saying? I only walked a kilometer or two inside that corridor. I must have traveled in time. The proof is that they speak Arabic, yet they don't even know what Egypt is. Where else in the world speaks Arabic besides the Arab world? He clutched his head in frustration. I feel like I can't even think straight. I used to be smarter than this. Then his gaze shifted. But this is proof. I have traveled to the past. He said that aloud when he saw a group of men walking in a single file, armed with swords and shields like ancient soldiers. He jumped to his feet and rushed toward the boy, grabbing his hand. I just need to ask you one thing. What year is this? The boy smirked. You must be drunk. It's the end of the year 2009, sir. Khaled staggered backward, his head spinning before he collapsed, as if he had lost consciousness. The boy laughed. Yes, sir. I think some sleep will do you good. He left him there and walked away. The next morning, Khaled woke up to loud noises. He found himself lying on the side of a street. He quickly stood up, dusted off his clothes, and tried to make himself presentable. When he looked ahead, he ran his fingers through his hair in astonishment. A massive crowd was moving in perfect coordination toward a single direction. Everyone was wearing what seemed to be brand new clothes. Men held their wives' hands, boys held the hands of young girls, all of whom looked stunningly beautiful. They walked in joy, each wearing a garland of flowers around their neck. Music filled the air, music unlike anything Khaled had ever heard before. It was mesmerizing. A group of musicians, dressed differently from the others, played drums, stringed instruments, and wind instruments Khaled had never seen. But their sound was extraordinary. They walked among the crowd, leading the procession. Some young men rode horses, each with a girl seated behind him, wrapping one arm around his waist while holding a flower in her other hand, waving it playfully. Khaled smiled. Now, I understand why everyone was excited about today. He was captivated by the acrobatics some performers were doing until his eyes caught something familiar, that luxurious carriage, the same one he had clung to when he was in the desert. It moved through the crowd, and from it emerged an incredibly beautiful young woman. The moment she appeared, people cheered in excitement. The celebration became even more lively. She began throwing handfuls of flowers, and everyone scrambled to catch them. The more she threw, the more the crowd surged forward, competing for even a single petal. Khaled watched with a wide smile, feeling an unexpected sense of peace as he observed her. Just then, a young woman approached him and asked, "Why are you standing alone? I can accompany you today for free." Khaled glanced at her, then turned back toward the girl in the carriage. "No, thank you." Looking away, his eyes suddenly caught sight of Yaman in the crowd. He pushed his way through the people until he finally reached him. "Yaman, do you remember me?" Yaman smiled. "Yes, of course. Welcome back, my friend." He then looked at Khaled's clothes. "Congratulations on your new outfit." Then he asked, "So, how was your first day in Zikola?" The sounds around them were loud. so Khaled had to raise his voice. "The first day? I still don't understand what's going on." Yaman laughed. "Maybe because we're in the Zikola festivities. Once the celebrations end, life returns to normal. These are exceptional days, not like the rest." Khaled smiled. "I wish." Then he asked, "So, where's your girl?" Yaman looked surprised. "What?" Khaled laughed. "I mean your girlfriend. I see most of the guys here have someone with them." Yaman smiled. "Oh, no, I'm not in a relationship yet." Khaled looked ahead and asked, "Where are we going?" Then he felt like he didn't understand, so he rephrased, "I mean, where exactly are we headed?" Yaman chuckled. "We're going to the festival grounds, where all the people of Zikola will gather and someone will be sacrificed." Khaled's eyes widened. "Oh, I get it. The poor guy." He fell silent and kept walking with the crowd until he noticed something and asked again, "Who is she?" He pointed to a young woman throwing flowers from a carriage. Yaman answered, "That's Aseel, Zikola's doctor." Khaled murmured to himself, "Aseel? A doctor?" Then he saw her toss a flower into the air. As it fell, the crowd scrambled for it. Taking advantage of his height, Khaled leapt up, caught it, and smiled at her. She returned his smile, and for a moment he was lost. The crowd kept moving, and Khaled enjoyed the festival, the mesmerizing music that filled the air, the scent of flowers that refreshed his chest, making him forget his own questions about Zikola. He walked beside Yaman, glancing at Aseel, who smiled every time someone caught one of her flowers. Then he glanced, completely differently, at another girl, the one he had refused to walk with. She had not taken her eyes off him the entire time, and every time their eyes met, she stuck her tongue out at him in frustration. Khaled just smirked, then turned back to Aseel, inhaled the scent of the flower in his hand, and kept walking. They finally arrived at a vast open space, and Khaled was stunned to see an enormous crowd, possibly over 50,000 people. Shocked, he asked, "Who are all these people?" Yaman replied, "They're the people of Zikola. They've come from all its regions. We came from one area, but the rest came from other places." Just then, Yaman's face lit up as another young man approached and embraced him tightly. Yaman turned to Khaled. "This is my childhood friend Ayad." Then he introduced Khaled. "And this is Khaled, my new friend. He seems honorable. He'll be your friend too, of course." Khaled shook hands with Ayad, smiling. "Yeah, we'll be friends. Until I leave soon." Ayad burst into loud laughter. "Leave?" He looked at Yaman. "Your friend wants to leave." He laughed again. Khaled's face darkened. "Is it so strange that I want to leave?" Yaman was about to answer, but he quickly gestured for Khaled to be silent. The drums had begun to beat loudly. The entire crowd fell silent. The music stopped. A massive man climbed onto a high platform, holding a long sword. Khaled immediately understood the sacrifice was about to happen. The young man who had told him about it hadn't been lying. Two strong men dragged a frail, sickly-looking man with a shaved head onto the platform. He was still young, but clearly weak. The crowd remained silent. The drums beat again. Every single person in the city dropped to their knees, except Khaled. Yaman pulled him down beside him and Ayad. Khaled looked toward the platform, where the poor man was also forced onto his knees, his hands tied behind his back. Then, after a moment, the executioner pricked his back with the tip of the sword. The man's head jerked up, and in a swift motion, the sword fell, His head was severed, blood splattered across the platform. The crowd roared with joy. Music erupted once more. The people began dancing and celebrating. Acrobats performed in the streets. Everything returned to festivity. But Khaled felt a chill run through his body. His heart pounded violently. His breath grew rapid. He stared at the headless corpse, his body trembling. He had never seen anything like this before. His hands reached for his face. Am I dreaming, or is this real? He asked himself again. Why did they kill that poor man? In our world, we help the poor. These people have no hearts. Even Yaman's friend, he's celebrating. Khaled turned sharply to Yaman. What year is this? Yaman answered calmly. We're at the end of the 9th year after 2000. Khaled's eyes widened. 2009? How? Yaman smiled to soothe him. Time, my friend. Can we change it? But Khaled wasn't calmed. He turned to Ayad, shouting, And what's so strange about me leaving Zikola? Ayad replied, My friend, the gates of Zikola closed at dawn today. They only open once a year, the day before Zikola Day, and close again until the next Zikola Day. No one can leave until then. Yaman added, That's the day you arrived here. Then he looked at Khaled, puzzled. Why do you want to leave? You're not poor. Khaled snapped, Who told you I'm not poor? No, I am poor. I own nothing. Ayad frowned. How? Don't you feel it? Khaled, still furious, shouted, Feel what? Even the money I had, it was just by chance that I had some, turned out to be worthless here. Yaman chuckled. And why do you need it, my friend? Khaled replied, Because it's money. I buy what I need with it. Yaman asked, You mean currency? Yes, Khaled snapped. Yaman went quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again. Oh, now I understand why you were so shaken when you saw that man executed. You're afraid that if you're poor, you'll end up like him. He looked at Khaled seriously. My friend, our currency is completely different. In Zikola, intelligence is money. The intelligent are the rich, and the poor are the least intelligent. Here, we work and earn in intelligence units. We buy and pay using intelligence. Even food costs intelligence. He paused, then continued. I don't know where you came from, but we were born into this system. We have to protect our intelligence, and from the moment you entered Zikola, you became one of us. You have to protect your intelligence, grow it, because if Zikola Day comes and you're the least intelligent, you'll end up like him. He pointed at the executed man's corpse. Khaled stared at him, utterly lost. Yaman, I thought you were sensible. Yaman replied calmly. I know you think we're foolish, but we, the people of Zikola, are different from the rest of the world. Everyone knows that. That's why they fear entering our land, because they don't want to experience the Zikola shiver and become like us. Khaled suddenly remembered. That shiver, that sharp pain in his head when he crossed Zikola's gate. Yaman continued, You have to believe us. You have to protect your intelligence. Thinking we're fools won't help you. You can't leave Zikola no matter what. And if the next Zikola Day comes and you're the least intelligent, he gestured at the corpse again. That will be your fate. Shock spread across Khaled's face, and worry crept into him when he felt that his intelligence had actually decreased since entering this city. His ability to think had weakened slightly, and he didn't know why. But what Yaman was saying made no sense until he suddenly remembered something. He turned to Yaman and said, What you're saying isn't true. I ate, drank, and even bought my clothes without paying anything. Yaman smiled. My friend, did you notice the prices marked in units at those places? Khaled recalled the strange units he had seen before. Yes, I did. Yaman continued. You don't pay with your hands. The payment transfers automatically between us. As long as you saw the units, the prices, and stayed in those places, it means you agreed to buy and accepted the prices. The cost of what you ate or bought was taken from you and given to the owner without your will. Strangers call it the Zikola curse. Khaled interrupted in shock. But I ate a lot, and those clothes had the highest unit price written on them. The seller even told me it was his most expensive outfit and thanked me for being rich. Yaman nodded. Exactly, my friend. I noticed that you looked different today than when I first saw you. He then glanced at Iyad and said, It seems our friend here has lost quite a bit of his wealth. Khaled's heart pounded. How do you know? Yaman smiled. Your face is paler, my friend. He continued, The less intelligence you have, the paler you become. Illness starts creeping into your body. That's how we know who's rich and who's poor. The wealthier you are, the healthier and even younger you look. But when you lose your wealth, sickness starts to take hold until Zikola Day arrives. That's when the soldiers gather the sickest people in the city and bring them to Dr. Aseel. She determines who is truly ill and who is just sick from poverty. Then she chooses the 3 poorest among them. Khaled interrupted. This place is insane. He turned and ran, his heart pounding with fear. Could what they said really be true? He pushed through the crowd celebrating in the streets. Music filled the air, reaching its peak. The people danced and cheered as he struggled to move through them, bumping into men and women without stopping to apologize. He only had one thing on his mind, getting to Zikola's gate. He ran, pushing forward, sweat dripping down his forehead. Finally, he saw the gate, but it was already closed, guarded by many soldiers. Khaled approached one of them, a massive man, and said, I need to leave. The guard laughed mockingly. Leave? Yes, I want to go, Khaled shouted. The guard laughed again and turned to another soldier. Look at this. We leave the Zikola celebrations, and what do we get? Drunks causing trouble. I'm not drunk. I need to leave, Khaled insisted, pushing the guard. The soldier's face darkened with anger before delivering a powerful punch that sent Khaled stumbling backward. He hit the ground, blood trickling from his left eyebrow. He quickly stood up again and faced the guard, but then something caught his eye, his reflection in the soldier's shiny armor. His breath quickened, his heart pounded, his face was pale. The guard's harsh voice snapped him back to reality. Go back where you came from, or prison will be your fate. Khaled touched his bleak brow, realizing the truth. This gate wouldn't open, just like Iyad had warned him, and everything Yaman had said. It was real. He walked aimlessly through the city, lost in thought. A year. How could he survive in this cursed land for a whole year? He hadn't even lasted one day. What if the year passed, and he ended up the poorest in the city? The dumbest. His thoughts raced, and suddenly he cried out, And what about my grandfather? Can he live without me for a whole year? I was thinking 2 or 3 days, but a year, a whole year here. He kept walking in a daze until a horse collided with him. It was pulling a luxurious carriage. The driver shouted angrily at him as the carriage came to a stop. A woman stepped out quickly, It was Aseel. She wanted to check on him, but he walked away, lost in his own world. She called out to him again and again, but he didn't look back. She sighed, watching him go. If it had been anyone else, they would have demanded compensation. Then she got back into her carriage and ordered the driver to move on. Hours passed. Khaled was still wandering the city, his mind racing. Before he knew it, he had reached a vast lake. He hurried to it, drank deeply, and leaned against a nearby tree, laughing bitterly. He imagined his father appearing in this city. He'd be executed immediately, he thought. Even Mona, if she came here, they'd kill her too. His friends? They weren't smart at all. They'd be doomed. He chuckled. I need food. How much intelligence does that cost? He laughed again, thinking about one of his friends, a big guy who ate constantly. If he were here, he'd lose all his wealth just to keep eating. Then he shook his head, talking to himself. Laughing, Khaled? Really, only an Egyptian could joke in a crisis like this. He sighed. What am I going to do? A voice in his head answered, You'll survive, just like the people here. Do I have another choice? No. A small smile formed on his face, and in a deep voice he said, Then get used to it. Welcome to Zikola. He looked up at the night sky. Strange fireworks filled the air. Zikola Day, he whispered. In just a few hours it will be over, and I'll see what this place is really like. He turned back to the lake. It was quiet. No one else was around. Perfect. He decided to take a bath. Just as he removed his clothes and was about to step into the water, he heard whispers, laughter. He turned and saw two young women staring at him. He quickly grabbed his clothes, dressed, and ran back to the tree. He shook his head and muttered, Yeah, I should probably just sleep. The night passed. Morning came. Khaled was still asleep under the tree until screams woke him. He looked up and saw a woman shouting, My son! He's drowning! Khaled ran into the water, still in his clothes. The boy was far out, and the lake was deeper than he expected. But he pushed forward, grabbed the boy, and pulled him toward the shore. The child was unconscious. His mother sobbed uncontrollably. Khaled laid the boy on his back and pressed on his chest, performing CPR. He breathed air into the boy's mouth, then pressed again. People gathered, including Aseel, who rushed forward. Step aside, she said, but Khaled ignored her. He kept pressing, breathing, pressing again, until the boy gasped and opened his eyes. Khaled placed 2 fingers on the boy's neck, feeling his pulse. Thank God, he said. The mother hugged her son tightly, crying, Thank you! Thank you! Then she turned to Khaled. How much do you want for saving him? Khaled shook his head. I don't want anything. Anyone would have done the same. Just take care of him from now on. The people around him stared in confusion. Aseel stepped closer. How did you do that? She asked. And why didn't you let me help? Khaled finally lifted his head and looked at her. His heart pounded. It was the first time he had really seen her up close. She was standing just a step away. He thought to himself, She is breathtakingly beautiful. He gazed at her long black hair, her narrow eyes, and her long dark lashes. He remembered her laughter when she tossed the flowers, how her eyes would narrow even more as she laughed, making her even more beautiful, especially with her delicate lips. Then he whispered softly, Aseel. She, too, was surprised. After all, he was the one who had ignored her and walked away when her carriage's horse had bumped into him. She asked, "How did you do that?" Then she laughed. "For the first time, I feel like I've learned something useful." "It's a first aid course I took in Cairo," he said, then quickly pulled out a flower from his soaked clothes, the same flower he had picked up the day before. He looked at her with a smile. "Is this your flower? I've kept it." She ignored his comment about the flower and asked, "Why is your accent strange?" Then she continued, "And where is this Cairo?" He smiled. "That's a long story. And of course you wouldn't know Cairo. I'm not from Zikola." Wanting to speak in her dialect, he continued, "I'm not from Zikola. I entered Zikola the day before yesterday, not knowing its gates would close." Aseel fell silent, as if recalling something. Then she looked at him and said, "Just like me." Khaled stammered, "Like you?" Aseel replied, "Yes, like me. I wasn't from Zikola either." She then noticed his eyebrow, which hadn't healed from its wound. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" he asked. "I think my carriage's horse injured your eyebrow," she answered. He smiled. "What horse?" "My horse yesterday." Then Khaled remembered. No, it wasn't the horse." "I should be the one apologizing to you," he admitted. "Yesterday I wasn't myself after seeing that poor man get slaughtered. But please, continue your story. How are you not from Zikola?"